Hey guys, it's Allie. Welcome back to Infertile, the podcast. This is episode 161 called Sara Walsh. Today's episode is sponsored by Pre-Mama Wellness. Pre-Mama creates doctor-backed supplements that support every stage of your maternity wellness journey. Pre-Mama Fertility Support for Her is the #1 selling over-the-counter fertility supplement for women trying to conceive. All Pre-Mama supplements are gluten-free, non-GMO, vegan or vegetarian, with no additives and no synthetic flavors. Discover why moms and dads-to-be trust Pre-Mama Wellness for their nutritional support, from preconception to postpartum, by visiting premamawellness.com. You can get your first month supply free when you subscribe to any Pre-Mama product for a limited time. Check it out at premamawellness.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Prove, a women's health company dedicated to providing information and solutions on key fertility hormones so they can reach their goals faster. Prove founder Amy Beckley, PhD, invented the first and only FDA-cleared PDG test after her own battle with infertility. When she learned her 7 miscarriages and 2 rounds of IVF could have been prevented by an inexpensive progesterone supplement, she set out to help other women better understand their ovulation quality from home. Prove's newest kit, Complete, allows women to measure all 4 key cycle hormones that impact conception from the comfort of home so they can get pregnant faster. With just one test kit, you can better understand ovarian reserve, identify up to 6 fertile days, pinpoint peak fertility, and confirm ovulation quality. And now, the free Prove Insight app takes your hormone knowledge one step further by providing numeric hormone levels, info about what they mean, and personalized action plans to help you reach your fertility goals faster. Prove also offers an entire suite of at-home hormone tests and hormone-supporting products to empower you with the right information on your journey. You guys know that I love female-founded companies and products that can truly benefit those battling infertility. So check out Prove. The best part is that they're giving Infertile AF listeners a special discount code. So go to ProveTest, that's PROOVTEST.com, enter the code ALLIE25, and you'll get 25% off your first Prove order of $25 or more. That's PROOVTEST.com. Thanks, Prove. This episode is supported by Receptiva DX. The Receptiva DX test can help couples struggling with unexplained infertility. Getting pregnant isn't easy, as so many of you know. Many couples struggle with infertility, and unexplained infertility can be particularly frustrating. Women facing unsuccessful IVF may not know that endometriosis is the underlying cause, a disease that can impact the success rates of IVF treatments and often has no symptoms. The Receptiva DX test can help identify endometriosis before an embryo transfer, and it has the potential to save women the stress, anxiety, and cost of multiple failed IVF attempts. The good news is, multiple studies show treatment of women with a positive Receptiva DX test improves live birth outcomes by over 50%. Receptiva DX can detect all stages of endometriosis and help women make better decisions in planning for pregnancy. You can learn more at receptivadx.com or download their app, which is also called Receptiva DX. All right, guys, I'm so excited about my guest today, Sara Walsh, who is so entertaining and such a great storyteller. This conversation is really, really great. And it's no surprise because she is an Emmy Award-winning sportscaster that you probably know from NFL on Fox or the NFL Network. And today we are going to talk about all the things she went through to have her, what she calls her miracle twins, including 4 miscarriages, working in a male-dominated industry that drove her to keep what she was doing a secret, her IVF Hail Mary, and so much more. So I love this conversation. I love this woman. Without further ado, this is Sara's infertility story. All right. So thanks so much for doing this, Sara. It's so good to talk to you.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a long time since I've actually spoken about any of this topic in my life.
Well, I'm honored to have you. And I love on your Instagram, in your bio, it says Emmy Award-winning sportscaster. And thanks to an IVF Hail Mary, mom of miracle twins. And that resonated with me because I had an IVF Hail Mary as well. So let's start at the beginning with you. Did you always want to be a mom?
I would be lying if I said that I was one of these people that thought about it all the time. Like I just wasn't, I wasn't one of those little girls that grew up playing with dolls. I was an athlete. I was really around, like everyone in our neighborhood they were boys. So like I'd play soccer with them. So I didn't have this innate, like, oh, it's all I've ever wanted to be. And, you know, to be honest, like if I said otherwise, like I would be lying. Like it just was not, you know, first and foremost in my mind. And I wasn't also one of those little girls that dreamed about getting married. And I wasn't opposed to any of it. I just kind of thought it was one of those things in the back of my mind, back burner, like that'll happen because that's what happens in life. But it just was never like top of mind for me. I was a college athlete. So, you know, focusing on playing was, you know, everything for the longest time of my life. And then when I was done with college, I had this career thing that I was just, you know, so hardcore pursuing that it didn't really leave time for anything else. And it just, none of that, again, I thought it would happen, but it never made sense to me. And the timing was never right until later in my life when I met my husband. And that obviously changed some things. And, you know, I didn't get married till later. I was 35 when I got married. And so it just, you know, that was the timing of the way that my life worked out. And I think when it comes to, you know, talking about some of the stuff we're going to talk about, like it didn't. So again, I wasn't someone that was like, oh, I'm can't wait to be a mom. But then when you find out that you can't be, or, you know, I was in a pretty dire situation where it didn't look like I can be, like that just hits differently. Right. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, why didn't I try this sooner? Why didn't I? So it wasn't like the biggest priority in my life. But then when I couldn't have it happen, it became such a devastating situation in my life.
Absolutely. I can relate to that so much because I was kind of the same. I didn't grow up always, you know, thinking I would have a lot of kids or even thinking about it at all. I just kind of assumed I would. But then when it wasn't happening, and I've said this before, like there's nothing sadder than wanting a baby and not being able to have one. Like it's just so heartbreaking on so many different levels.
Well, because until you get into that situation where you've made the decision that you want one, you don't really you don't think about it being devastating because I think we also all grow up. And I remember when I was younger, I was thinking, okay, well, if you graduate college at 21, you get married at 22. Again, this is probably like 14-year-old me thinking that, right? And then like things change. And then I'm like 22 and I'm like, what am I thinking? Like, we're not even close to that, but like,
totally.
So you didn't, you know, this idea of like how it's so devastating and so sad. Well, you would never really think about that until you're actually in the position. Right. And so, you know, we just all kind of assume that it'll happen or that it can happen. And I think you look around and it just seems like it happens for everybody. Right. And you don't think about the people it's not happening to until you're one of them or you're close with one of them.
Yes. And it's hard to even understand what someone's going through until you're in the thick of it too.
Yep.
So tell me about meeting your husband, Matt.
So we actually met a long, long time ago. I was a local reporter in Nashville, Tennessee. I was a sports reporter. He was a baseball player for the Vanderbilt baseball team. So he was sort of like their spokesperson that they would trot out to talk to the media a lot because he was a good talker. So I had interviewed him a couple times. And I just remember at the time, again, because I was very professional and he was also in college and I was not. I liked him. He's really smart and he's also easy on the eyes, but he's really smart. And I just remember thinking if I was in college, that's somebody that would have been a friend of mine, honestly. Like, I know that sounds like such a lie right now, but I remember saying that to my producer. I'm like, oh, we would have hung out. That's who I would have hung out with. And cause I had guy friends and I was sort of in that world and it was nothing more than that. That's all it was. And then almost not a decade later, but several years down the road, almost like I'm not doing the math right because I never do math right on anything, but maybe like 6-7 years later, he's now 28. I was like 34 or something at the time. And I was then on SportsCenter for ESPN, and his college roommate back in the day was on SportsCenter because the college roommate went on to be in the big leagues and he was having like a career year. And so he's on and we were doing this interview and I never assumed that someone remembers me from back in the day, but I'm like, oh, you know, I worked in Nashville. I covered you back when I had actually done a feature on this guy. And he was like, oh yeah, my friend, Matt Bushman, who's my husband. He's like, oh, my friend Matt says hi. And I'm like, oh my gosh, tell Matt I love him. Like, he's great. And I meant it like, oh, I love him. He was awesome to deal with. And he's like, no, he like loves you. and it was like kind of joking, but I'm like, is he joking? Like, I mean, he didn't really love me, but like, it was kind of like one of those, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then we got reconnected. So we knew people who knew people. And then, so we were reconnected like almost nearly a decade later. And,
So great.
and we knew immediately, but at that point I was old. So then, kidding around, and I'm the kind of person that has to find humor in anything.
Same.
When we were going through all of this, because I think sometimes like, if you don't laugh at stuff, like you're going to cry. Right. So I
100%.
would make jokes, even going through the IVF stuff. But, I was like, if you would have just gotten together with me back in the day, like none of this would have been a problem. Like this is technically your fault because like I'm so old now.
You took too long.
Yeah, you took way too long. But so yeah, that's how we met. We met like long ago, and then we're reintroduced.
I love that. So how soon after you guys got married did you start talking about having babies, or was it before you even got married?
We got married pretty quick. We honestly, like we hung out like maybe twice, and he's like, we should get married. And I'm like, yeah, it was just like one of those things that like everything made sense. And again, I would not recommend this if you're 21 years old, but I was older, he was older, and I just knew. And again, like, but what's interesting is, I had dated people, and people would be like, do you want to get married? And I'd be like, nah, I don't know. I don't really think about it. And I remember people saying to me, oh, you haven't met the right one. And I was like, well, maybe I just don't want to get married. Like I refuse to think that like, it was because I wasn't maybe with the right person. I was just like, I just think I'm somebody that doesn't want to get married. And then it's funny because then I meet the right person, and immediately like we had hung out twice. He's like, we should get married. And I'm like, yep, that makes sense. And it just like made sense. So after we got married, like again, at that point, I'm like 35, turning 36, I think. And we knew, like, we just kind of knew that I probably didn't have a long time to delay trying. And we didn't know how long, that could possibly take. But it's funny because again, I was an athlete. He was an athlete. Like we're in good shape. We take care of ourselves, all of those things. And I knew older friends of mine. And when I say older, like, I mean, we're talking, everything's relative, right? But, they were like, yeah, I had a baby at 38. No problem. My husband's mother had, his sister like in her 40s, and like, so we just didn't know. And so pretty quickly, like after we got married, as soon as we started trying, like the first month we tried, I got pregnant, and I was like, oh my God, this is easy. And then I lost that baby. And so my situation was that I could get pregnant, but I couldn't, the eggs were just no good, or something would be wrong, and I would like lose them.
So sorry.
So yeah. And it was funny though, because again, once you're not in that world and you don't know. So literally the first month we tried, I got pregnant, and I'm thinking, again, this is so easy, right? Like you just want to be pregnant, and you are. And I think even when I lost the first one, I'm like, okay, well, that's common. Like that happens. And like, you just don't really know until you're in that world, and you start deep diving on like what the statistics are of getting pregnant at any age, right? Because it has to be like the right time, the right, like literally the right hour, the right egg.
It's so much harder than
things.
We've been taught our whole lives.
Yeah. And you start to be like, how does anybody get pregnant on a random one night stand? I mean, it's impossible to get pregnant when you can't get pregnant.
Completely. And what you just said about having the one miscarriage, that's how I had 4 miscarriages between my daughter and my son. And the first one, I was like, obviously very upset, but I was like, everybody has a miscarriage. Like it felt so common. I knew so many people who'd had one, but I didn't know people who'd had 2. And then when I had the second one, I was like, wait, shit, this is not normal.
Yeah. And I wasn't telling anybody. So like, I didn't even, like I wasn't even saying like I had a miscarriage, so that I wasn't getting people going, oh, well, that happened to me too. Like I was just very much like alone, isolated in this bubble. But again, I sort of at the start of that journey, like had this athlete's mentality, like it'll be fine. We got pregnant in like a hot second. So like, this one just wasn't meant to work. And then, you start to go down this path, and nobody knows how bad it is until you're really down the path. Right. And you're doing these tests, and you're doing, you're getting dire news. And what started out as like, we just thought would be fine, was not fine for us. And it took a lot. And so when I said like IVF Hail Mary, I just didn't know how else to describe it. And the fact that like for me, in my situation with everything that we endured, and I ended up ultimately having 4 miscarriages. We also couldn't get eggs. Like once we finally got into the bubble of, at least for us, it was like, okay, this didn't work. We'll go to this, and it's probably this. And then that didn't work. And then it went one step further down the ladder of like things going wrong when we didn't start out. And everyone's story is different. I think people start off with at a young age, they are visiting their doctor and they know that there's going to be issues, or, like we didn't know anything. And it was just like, oh, well, this isn't great. And now this just got worse. And now this just got worse. And that's kind of how it was for us. And it just, every turn we took, it was sort of more bad news and more bad news and more bad news.
So can we unpack that a little bit, Sarah? So tell me about, like, you wrote for Health Magazine, this wonderful article about, you know, your story and what you've been through. And thank you so much for sharing all of that. You know, you talked about having a miscarriage when you were hosting SportsCenter. Was that the first one, or was that one of the other? Okay.
Yeah. So that was the first one. So I was pregnant and I was on the road a lot, and I was working, honestly, probably the most insane schedule of my career at that point, where it was like traveling and these early morning shows, but I happened to be on the road. So away from the studios where I'm home, like the only person that knew I was pregnant was my husband. And for many reasons, I was like keeping that private. And, you know, I work in a completely male dominated industry.
Right.
You know, there was things about how you're traveling and who's traveling. And I just never wanted to give any reason that someone could say I was slacking or I was, you know, and maybe some of this was me and my own like self-conscious of like, I'm going to just operate as normal. And it wasn't normal because I was pregnant and I was just running myself ragged. And I was on the road doing a show where it was like, it was like in conjunction with College Game Day, which is just thousands of kids screaming. And I started to have problems on the road, and I honestly didn't know what to do. And I go back now and I would think, and this is what I try to tell people, like advocate for yourself, for your health, like stick up for yourself because nobody else will. But again, I didn't want to tell anybody. I was scared. And I'm like, I can't, you know, I know what it's like if you have to go to the hospital and you have to go to the emergency room, you're there for hours. This started happening overnight. I needed to be in work at like 5, 6 in the morning. And when I say work, like on a set in Alabama, in Tuscaloosa, like this is, I'm not there. I'm not from there. Like we've got, you know, and I'm working with all guys, and I'm not working with literally anyone that I can tell what's going on. And I was embarrassed. Like, I honestly don't want to tell anybody. I'm like, I think this is what's happening. And, I let my husband know, and he starts, you know, calling doctors, and, you know, somebody knew that something was a little off, and they're like, you're going to do this show. And in my head, I'm thinking, if I don't show up, like if this show comes on at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m., whenever we came on, and I'm not on, there's not like a replacement person sitting in the wings in Tuscaloosa. Like we traveled like our show there. And then my mom would be aware, who would turn on the TV and be like, why aren't you on? Like my coworkers, my producers back that were in Bristol producing the show. Like to me, there was no way, even though I knew I needed to go to the hospital, that I could not pop up on screen at 8 a.m. when I was there yesterday. We did a show there the day before. And so at that point, you know, my husband was just calling like the doctors back home in Connecticut where we lived. Like, what do we do? Can she get on a plane to come back here? Like, what's the severity of this? And it was just a disaster because I was doing this while I'm on TV, and I didn't, you know, and this will just show you where I was at. I was literally like, I had a plane ticket to get back in Tuscaloosa to Hartford, Connecticut, not a lot of directs. And so, you know, I had a very small window from the time the show ended to getting to an airport that again was this tiny little airport, to get me to another airport, to get me home, all these things. And in my head, I'm like, if I don't get on that plane, am I going to have to pay for some insane plane ticket back? Like if I'm in the hospital for 2 days, like and again, saying that out loud, you're like, you shouldn't have been worried about that.
No, it makes
sense. These were the things that were going through my head of like, I got to get on this plane and I got to get back. And if I'm losing this baby, like, I don't want to lose it. I don't want to be here alone in a hospital in Tuscaloosa by myself.
100%. What you wrote in the health article, and I want to quote it because I think this sentence was so important and relatable. You said, as the only woman on our crew, I worried that if I let on what was happening, I'd be judged, and that in the future, the network might decide it would be easier to send a guy to host a show instead of me. So I stuck it out. And I love that you said that, because I think that so many women have gone through something like that, where like they can't let on, or they're worried they're going to risk something. And so I thought that was really great that you said that.
Yeah. Well, like in a situation where it's very subjective of like, I can pick this person, like, or I can pick like, oh, Sarah's going through something medically, like we don't want to risk her on the road, or like, so that all of these things were like in my mind. And I was from the time I started there being like, I don't ever want to be a problem. I don't ever want to like cause anybody issues. Like I will show, you know, like I'm the kind of person that will show up to work like sick, and like now in this COVID era, like you're told not to. I know what you mean though. Back in the day, like, like I would show up with no voice. I like,
you work really hard.
One time before a show, and they're like, you have to go to the hospital. I was with the makeup girls in the makeup room. And I'm like, no, nobody say anything. Like, I'm going to get through this. Like I would just, and I think some of that was like me being an athlete, like you just play through it, but especially something so personal, like nobody in my family knew. So like, I didn't want to go to somebody and be like, hey, some guy and be like, hey, this is what's going on. This is embarrassing. Like, so it was all of that.
I get it.
And, And I just got back to, and it's funny when I've even shared that, I've gotten so many messages from women everywhere, right? So it doesn't have to just be like in a sports related field that I was, like women in law firms, women in, you know, like, I mean, it's not only me. And I know that now, but when you're in it, and again, and I'd never been pregnant before either. So I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't know how I'm handling anything. I did know I was running myself ragged. So then in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm an idiot. Cause like I did this. Right. And so,
again,
I
really
ended
common.
I ended up getting back, on a plane and getting back, even the doctors were like, we don't know if you should fly. And it was just like, it was terrible and it was awful. And, got picked up at the airport, went straight to the hospital, and it was like really hard for me. And it was really hard work wise. And, when I went back to work, like then the first thing that was said to me when I walked in, so this happened in Tuscaloosa, I walked into work and they go, "Hey, you're going to Tuscaloosa next weekekend." And I was like, what? And like, that never happens. Like, you never go to the same place twice. Like, you never, in my whole career, that's never happened. Like, you don't get usually assigned to the same game, the thing that just happened. And I literally was like, what? And they're like, "You're going back to Tuscaloosa next weekend." And in my head, I was just like, I cannot go back there. Like, this just happened to me there. And I had to go back. And like, that was like traumatizing. So it was like
triggering,
traumatizing. Yeah. Like in a lot of different ways. And so literally the next thing out, I'm back sitting on a set in Tuscaloosa, and all I could think of is I was like, I was here 2 weeks ago, and like I was pregnant when I showed up here, and I'm not. Like, same plane ride back, same.
Oh,
it was just like,
sorry. Yeah.
And
hard.
It was just like a lot. And I think I never even really processed being sad, because I was like shell shocked from just everything that went on. I mean, I like, you know, had emailed my boss from the hospital that night and didn't hear back. And I was just like, and I was like, is that normal? Like, is that like, I just felt like it kind of made me be like, hey, this is nothing. Like, what happened to you is nothing. It doesn't matter. And like, you need to get over it, because like, it doesn't even matter. Just go back to Tuscaloosa. And like, I think it really messed with me mind wise, because then I would see these other women that are like, I'm so sad, and people that are supportive. And I'm like, I didn't have any of that. Like, it was like, get out there, do the show, go back to work. Like, and I think in some ways it altered, I'll say this, it definitely altered how I handled anything from there. And I think it was not healthy at all the way I handled things, because it was like this very much like, suck it up. It's not even a response of, hey, I'm sorry that happened to you, or how the heck did you get through the show today? We're so sorry. None of that. And it altered. So then when I got pregnant again, like, there was no way I was going to tell anybody anything.
Right.
And then when I lost the babies again, there was no way I was going to say anything. And so, you know, for people that have had a DNC, like one of the miscarriages, it was like a full on procedure, and I was in the hospital, and like, I went to work the next day, and they're like, you know, you should be out all week. And I'm like, I can't be out all week, because I can't tell them why I'm out all week, because I don't want to be like, you know, and then I felt like I turned into this girl that like, I definitely didn't want to be like, well, I'm the one that's having miscarriages. And like, so I think that on top, like all of this stuff at base level is hard. It's really hard. So in the best of circumstances, I think it's really, really hard to go through. If you have the best family, if you have the best support system, if you have the best circumstances, it's just hard. And then everyone else has the things that like pile on and make it harder. And I do think, because of what I was doing, and because of my own like pride of like, I'm not going to let anybody know, I think I made it significantly harder on myself.
Absolutely.
Mentally. And I try to tell people like, hey, do what's best for you. If what's best for you is telling people and saying like, hey, I got to be off tomorrow because I got to go to this IVF thing, and I just do it. I never did what was best for me in any of the situations. And it wasn't like, hey, you're strong. Like in some ways I'm like, hey, you're really stupid for handling it that way, but I didn't know. And so I'll cut myself slack on that. But like, I always tell anybody, like, do what's best for you. And if it's best for you to just be like, hey, I'm going to lay in bed all day today, and that's all I got, like, do that.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I wish I could tell myself to go back and be a little more selfish and like the handling of it for myself, because I didn't do that.
Right. Oh my gosh. That makes so much sense to me, and no judgment at all for how you handled it and what you did. That's what you had to do in that moment. Exactly.
But you know, what's funny? I think too, that we internally feel like people are going to judge us maybe worse than they are. And I just felt like everyone was like looking at me, and I didn't want to say what's going on. And I've learned through all of this that like, if you're just honest, like how someone judges you, like that's on them. Like I do remember sitting, like when I was getting mic'd up that first time with the miscarriage, I was with a male anchor who was not the normal person I was with. And if I was with my normal guy, maybe that would have gone differently. So it was someone I'd never even worked with before. And he just wrote on a piece of paper, like, are you okay? And I just said, not really. but I didn't say anything else because in my mind, I don't want to, this is like my thinking. I was like, I don't want to make him uncomfortable. This isn't his fault. He doesn't know anything that's going on. And I don't know this person. So we're not even friends. Like we just had never worked. Our paths had not crossed together.
Right.
And, I like, if I lean over and go, hey, I think I'm having a miscarriage, like that's like really heavy to put on somebody that like doesn't even know me. So I knew I couldn't do that. And so I wouldn't suggest doing that. I think even knowing what I know now, I wouldn't do that. But I definitely think there's times like I could have told producers, even male producers of mine, because like what I've come to learn is like they have lives. And I did end up telling the male co-anchor of mine, who was my normal co-anchor, who wasn't there that day, what had happened. And he was horrified. And he's like, this has happened to me. This has happened to my family. And like, I just remember being like, oh, like it's, like he was very sympathetic to me. And he was very like, he was actually wonderful to me. But that was like the one person I felt comfortable like saying anything to. And I think more often than not, people want to like help you, right? If they can. And that's another thing I learned, like I just took everything upon myself, but I think people really, truly would help. And I would like to believe that people really are good and, want to help people through tough times. But if you don't let them know, they can't help.
Right. Absolutely. So just going back to the chronology of your story. So you'd done IUIs for the second and third pregnancies, right? That both ended miscarriage, sadly. Then was it at that point that you guys decided to move on to IVF?
Yeah. So the first miscarriage, they were like, this happens. It could be anything. You got pregnant really easy. It'll happen. It's okay. I will say this, it's just when I go through things that were like horrifying and it's hard to even imagine that it happened. I remember when I was in the hospital that night and I was leaving, I remember, and I swear I would think I'm making this up if my husband could not confirm it because he heard it. We're leaving the hospital and this nurse circles, how when you're in a hospital, they'll have your like, the thing on your like wrist and it'll say your name, it'll say your date of birth. Your paperwork also says your date of birth. So it said my date of birth. It said 36 years old. The nurse circles it, says 36. She goes, it's only going to get harder for you.
Oh my God.
I'm like, oh yeah. I just had like, I can't even make up the crazy like stuff that happened to me. I was in Tuscaloosa earlier that morning on national television. I'm in a hospital right now. And I'm like, why would you say that? Like, I don't think it's going to get easier. Like, so little things like that would happen to me. And I'm like, am I in like the Twilight Zone? Like what medical professional like says, I've had, other people have said they've had like, so I was like, okay, lady, thank you. Awesome. Like, can't wait to get on out there and try again. But, yeah. So
you're very nice. Cause I was thinking something much, much more foul.
Yeah.
And like,
I didn't though, because again, I was in that area of being like, just completely like shell shocked of like, how did my day just unfold? Like it started like in the down south and I was pregnant and now I'm back in Connecticut and it just was crazy. But, so I ended up going to like a fertility doctor who was wonderful. And he was like, look, you don't have a fertility problem. You have a timing problem because at this time my husband was off playing baseball. So we were honestly after when we went to go try again, never in the same place at the same time. And so timing out. So I think I went to him originally to be like, hey, is there anything you can do? Like, can he leave sperm? And like, when it's the right time, I just come in and get it because he's like, it's never going to time out that you think you're going to hop a plane on a random, it's not going to work out schedule wise with the way your life is. So he's like, you should do IUI. And again, we don't think there's a problem. He had done initial checks and like my reserve, everything looked fine. He's like, I'm telling you, this is a timing problem. So that's when we did the IUI just because we needed to time things up correctly. So we did IUI. And I remember another thing they don't tell you and you don't know till you're into it. Because again, I am still under the mindset of like, it's so easy to get pregnant. And the IUI thing, I'm thinking like, that's 100% success rate, right? Because like they're looking at the, like your ovaries, they're telling you like, on this date at this time, like this is when it's going to work. And so I remember being on the table and he's like, there's like a 20% success rate. I'm like, 20%? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I'm paying to be here like on the right day. Like you've got your little syringe, like this isn't 100%. And he's like, no, it's 20. And I'm like, those aren't great odds. And those are technically, I guess, really good odds because you're like basically beating the system on how you're doing it. But I still got pregnant on that right away. Lost that one, did IUI again. And after we lost the third one, after being pregnant, then they're like, okay, there's a problem. Like there's a problem with these eggs or they're going to have to be genetically tested. We're going to have to like harvest them in some ways. So we did IVF. And again, I was doing this and for anyone that's gone through IVF, like you don't control when you have, it's a short period of time that's taxing. I tell people when they say it's so hard, I'm like, well, no, it's like 2-3 weeks of it being really difficult of like, you have to go in
when you're doing the meds and
yeah, the meds, everything has to be at a certain time. And I worked these shows that were really early in the morning. We have to go in and get blood tested early in the morning.
Right.
So I would be like at these facilities freaking out and just looking at my watch because I'm like, I literally have to be on television in like an hour and a half and I'm 45 minutes away and nobody knows. And they say that like, it's not good to stress.
This is so stressful. Today's episode is brought to you by Sugar Break, the first natural, non-prescription support system that empowers you to reduce your sugar intake and manage healthy blood sugar levels so that you can live your best life. Their products are made with natural ingredients that have been scientifically tested in over 20 clinical studies and are proven to curb sugar cravings and promote healthy blood sugar management. All Sugar Break products are gluten-free and allergen-free, and their adult line is vegan. Sugar Break is backed by a world-class scientific advisory team, including an endocrinologist, the head of eating and weight disorders at Mount Sinai, a sugar addiction expert, a registered dietitian, a pediatric specialist, and more. So, of course, before endorsing these products, I had to try them myself, and I have to tell you guys about Reduce, which is one of Sugar Break's products. So Reduce is a good thing to try if you are suffering from PCOS, if you struggle with insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome, if you have a family history of diabetes, or you're just looking to maintain healthy blood sugar levels for your overall health. So I'm guessing that if you're listening to this podcast right now, you are interested in a healthy lifestyle. And I will tell you a little bit more about a couple of their other products. So they have Stabilize, which helps block the absorption of sugars and carbs. They have Reduce, which I was just talking about, which helps maintain healthy blood sugar levels. And they have Resist, which helps block the sweet taste in all foods. Okay, guys, so here's the deal. If you're interested in trying Sugar Break, go to www.sugarbreak.com and use my special promo code, which is InfertileAF, for 15% off your entire order. This applies to any products on their site. Again, just go to sugarbreak.com, use code InfertileAF, and you'll get 15% off your entire order. Thanks, Sugar Break.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's stressful baseline, and I'm just like compounding everything like that to make it as hard as possible. And at one point, like, there's this line and you don't get to cut the line. Everyone just shows up for blood work. You don't have like a time, like you can't stop. I would show up like an hour early and there'd already be a line. And I just would be sitting there like panicked in tears of like, I'm not going to make the show. I'm going to get in so much trouble. So I just completely like piled on stress in every way possible. But our first IVF thing. And then of course, this is another, like, I don't know. I just have the worst luck in some senses, but, I had committed to host this event in New York City, and I'm like, okay, well, I just can't have my retrieval fall on this day, and you can't control that. Right. And I had committed to it way out. Of course it falls on this day. So then I'm they somewhat sedate you a little bit. And I go, hey, what, does anybody like go after you have this retrieval and like host something? Cause now I've been like under drugs and stuff. And they're like, yeah, I wouldn't do that. I go, well, will I be able to read off the prompter tonight? And like, my doctor was actually really cool. He's like, he was like, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you think you can do it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do it.
Oh
but
my
it was
God.
Just like the worst timing. So
did you do it?
Oh yeah.
Holy shit.
And I'm going to be honest, they're like, don't mix any kind of alcohol, but like, so I'm in New York City. It was at the Plaza Hotel. So it was like this fancy thing. And I'm so embarrassed. Like, I can't call these people that I had planned months in advance and go, hey, so this is random. I just found out they're going to pull some eggs out tomorrow, which is the day of your event. So I don't want to tell anybody what's going on in my life in that sense. And I'm like embarrassed, and I shouldn't have been, but I was. And so I'm like, I got to do it. Like halfway through, I'm like, just give me a glass of wine. Like, I've had a long day. Like, I've deserved this. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen to me now? They got these eggs out. And so I like, again, don't do as I say, but I was like, I've earned this. And I like had a glass. My husband's like, you're going to be okay. I'm like, yeah, just give me the wine. I don't care at this point. But, it was successful in that, I had got 11 eggs out. And again, having never done it before, I think like, God, it should be some more. It should be whatever. Right. It's like 11's good. I wish it was more. Well, by the next day it was down to 5. And by the next day I was down to 2. Yeah. So
how did the event go though?
The event was great. Nobody had any idea.
See, you're such a professional.
What is funny about it, actually, like looking back and laughing, there's pictures of us dressed up from that night. And I know that was the night, like I have twins. That was the night that those twins were like, I guess you wouldn't say brought into the world, but became an egg or something. Like oh my God. They were harvested that day. So I'm like, look what I did on the day that you guys were there.
That's amazing. But, I mean, I can hands down say that you were the first person I've interviewed who has had a retrieval and then hosted an event at the Plaza Hotel that same night.
That puts me in a small minority. I hope for everybody else's case though. And like, even funnier about that is I used our ESPN makeup team that day. So I was down like 45 minutes away. I went back to Connecticut. So they had no idea. I'm sitting in the chair, like falling asleep. And I had the like, like when you get, IVs taken out and there's the, like cotton ball with like my arm was taped up from having IVs in. So I have like a jacket over that. And they're like, what happened to you? I'm like, oh, nothing. And then I'm like, kind of like passing out in the makeup chair. Anyway, I got through it and I looked pretty good for it. Like nobody had any idea. I was like in like a procedure center, like an hour before I was in that makeup room, but
amazing.
So we ultimately only got 2 and I was really bummed by that, but I was like, you know what, let's do another round. Let's go do another round right away. Cause I want to get the ball rolling. Like now we're several miscarriages deep.
Right. So you made 2 embryos.
We made 2 embryos.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And to just backtrack, I had gotten pregnant again after the first miscarriage, which was devastating, lost that really quickly. And then, through another IUI, I got to be like 3 months. So we had seen it, all this stuff. And it was another football season. And I was like on the road and they're like, it's not going to work. And I had to get on the road and do a show and call my husband who lived on the other side of the country because he was playing baseball. And it was, again, just like devastating. I think going like in front of the camera when this is going on and acting like nothing. And then I had like a DNC scheduled for like a Monday. And I remember being at Michigan, the University of Michigan, for this huge, like, I want to say it was like Jim Harbaugh's like debut there. And it was like a big deal. And I just am on this bus and I'm like, what is going on with my life? Like, I can't think of anything other than like, I'm in surgery 48 hours from now and having to like mask it again and hide it and act like nothing's wrong. And like, my husband, like it was September. So that's the end of baseball season. And he like packed up his stuff, on the spot where he's at. And he's like, I'm done with this season, and like drove back. Cause he knew I was just like, not going to make it. Like I was that like, just in a bad space, but having to like put on a show for everyone. And he even traveled with me on the road to like this game. And I knew that people were like, oh, she brought her husband because it's fun. And he was like literally there to like, honestly, like he thought like, I don't know, that I wasn't going to like make it, or that I was at that point, like starting to get where, not to get like too heavy, but like I was just starting to get like suicidal. Like I was just really like falling apart.
Yeah.
Cause it had been 3 times and it had been like faking stuff in front of everyone. And I just knew like, I just couldn't do it anymore. I like couldn't do another surgery. I couldn't do anything. So that happened. And I just also felt like for me, it was like deja vu. Like here I am another year later, sitting on these sets in the fall, and it's called football season and we're excited. And like, look, I bounced back, and I'm like, and here we are again, like, here we are again, like same thing, like this, like just cycle I could not get out of. Yeah. And then you start to feel like a failure. And then, like the one I could be like, this was bad, but like, and again, given where I was working, like not saying anything. And it just was really like, bad. And it was embarrassing. And like,
did you have any friends or anything that your community that you could lean on to for support, or like, but it was just you and your husband?
I had like my best friend, who knew and was like awesome. And was like, I would tell people after the fact, but never when I was like going through it. And so I would go to like great lengths to even hide I was pregnant. Like I would like fake drinking drinks when we were out. Right. Like I would fake, like I did everything you could do. Like I was not one of those people that was like pregnant, was like, I'm pregnant. Cause now at this point, and anybody that's ever lost a baby knows like you look at it differently. And unfortunately it clouds how you look at being pregnant. As soon as I feel like as soon as you've lost one, and if you are lucky enough to like, that never happens to you, it doesn't really enter your mind, right? You're like, I'm pregnant. It's great. I'm in this like great bubble of like happiness. And it's not until you like go through like, hey, this can be taken away at like any sonogram appointment, right? Like I was never going to view any pregnancy the same after even the first one, right? Like it was just a very cautious thing for me. So we had gone through like the terrible, devastating losses again. And I was literally just falling apart at that point. And then when we went from like 11 to 5 to 2 within like a 48-hour span of just having 2 healthy embryos. And when you look at the statistics, they will say that you need more than 2 to result in a pregnancy. Again, the odds were like low. So we were like, let's do another round. We do another round. Halfway through the round, which everyone that probably listens to this knows it's really expensive. It's really demoralizing, even, financially. Like I would look around these rooms and they're filled with women. And I'm like, how's everyone paying for this? Because I felt like, and I would say to my husband, our insurance covered not even like one round because it's so expensive. So it covered partially one round. But I mean, I used that up on like IUIs. Like, I mean,
Totally.
and I would like look around and be like, how's everyone paying for this? And it's like heartbreaking. And I mean, that's a whole other topic of, I feel like that should be different or covered differently because it really comes down to like, if you happen to work at one place that just happens to cover that in their insurance, like you can have a baby, but somebody else like can't like,
the financial piece of it is so frustrating.
It's frustrating and it's heartbreaking. And it's really sad that it comes down to like, who can pay for that and who can't in terms of some people getting the family that they wanted. And, so I would tell my husband, I'm like, I feel like we're just going down the highway and just throwing money out the window. Like if I pay $20,000 for a car, I'm driving off the lot with that car. Like we're paying $20,000 for nothing. Like there's no like reimbursement policy if it doesn't work. So if we get halfway through another round, they have to call and say, hey, like it's not working. Like we can't even do a retrieval. It doesn't work. So now we just, in my mind, I'm like, we just wasted all this money on all these meds. And they're like, but maybe it's because, you know, you did it right after your last round. So we wait again. And then it's this whole mind thing. And I would not put those two in because I'm like, we're not going to go and just waste those two. We're going to do it again and try to bank some. And we go and do it again. And I had switched doctors to be closer to try to alleviate some of the stress because I was going somewhere far away. And that was sort of a whole disaster. And it just wasn't a good fit, which I tell people too, like if something doesn't seem like a good fit to you, like advocate for yourself. Cause there was just so many times I just didn't advocate for myself. I just kind of took what someone was saying to me and would just felt like I got steamrolled. And the next time I went through another round of it, we get halfway through and there's like no eggs. There's like one. And I'm like, can you pull the one out? And they're like, nah, it wouldn't be worth it. And so we just went through another round of like not getting it. And at that point they were like, there's nothing more we can do. Like, we just don't think we can get any more. And it's just another round of like devastating news of me having to call my husband. Cause I'm like, at this point, it's been so many bad things over the course of probably 3 years straight of this that I'm like, I just don't think I can mentally handle putting those 2 eggs in and getting the news that like, this is it. Because as long as there were 2 on ice somewhere, to me, I was like, there is a small sliver of hope. And it's not great, but there's a small sliver. And I just didn't want to like ruin that small sliver of hope.
Yeah, of course. That makes sense. You don't want to get rid of that sliver of hope.
Yeah. At least it was out there. But as soon as I put that in and, you know, and a couple days later, they can call you and say it didn't work. Like, I'm like, I don't know where I'd go. And I just was guilt-ridden about that. I was like, that I was the reason like my husband wouldn't be a dad. When he had talked about how important it was to be a dad. And then he would try to obviously say the right things. And he'd say, you know, like, that's not everything. And we can have these lives. And I felt like I was letting my parents down because they couldn't be grandparents, and just like such intense guilt that like, no matter what anybody said to make me feel better, it wasn't going to make me feel better. And then I finally only put them in because the doctor, my original doctor who I loved, had to have rotator cuff surgery. Again, this is where like, there's so many weird things in life, right? That like, that circumstances that impact you, that shouldn't impact you. But he called me one day and he's like, and this is how great he was because he had 1 million patients. But he called me one day, he's like, I have to have rotator cuff surgery and I'm going to be out for a while. And he's like, I think you should put these in. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And he was like, Sarah, he's like, what if they both work? And I'm like, he goes, would you be done doing this stuff? And I said, well, of course I would. Like, well, I can't even have a kid. Like, I would love to have 2. Like, why not? And he was like, let's just put him in. And I still didn't want to do it. And he's like, it was to a point where he's like, Friday's the last day that I can like put him in. This is going to be my last day on this Friday. Like, if you don't come in. And so we did it. And I remember that morning being like, I just remember we had all problems that morning. Like, they couldn't even get something with my uterus. It just was like things were getting delayed. I'm like, this isn't even going right. But he finally comes in and he does it. My husband's not there. He's across the country. So again, I was like doing all this alone. And I was like, do you think you did a good job? And he's like, yeah, I think I did a great job. And he was just I love that he was so funny. Invested in your case. He really was. And he was so funny. And he had such a good sense of humor that it's what I needed, like very sarcastic. And he's so great, but it's like, it worked for me. Like, it probably wouldn't work for everybody. And I'm sure he's different to other people, but I was like, I don't know. I'm like, you only have one arm that's working right now. Do you think you handled this right? And he's like, yeah, he's like, I think I killed it. And I mean, that's poor choice of words. He's like, I crushed it. Right. Like, and he was like, so funny about it. And then sure enough, I had to call him, or the nurse called, because now he's off. Like, he's off on medical leave, having his surgery. Right. He's like out of loop.
So wait, just to bring everybody up to like, so you did your transfer with these 2 embryos, the only 2 embryos that you have.
Yes. And they couldn't get more. And they were like, basically like, we can't get more. Right. And then I will say, like, I blew off the blood tests like when you're supposed to go to them to get tested. Cause I was like, I can't do it. Like, and you're giving yourself
what? After like the 2-week wait, you didn't do it?
No. And I remember being on TV and seeing like looking down and the phone was ringing like on silent of like the calls from the clinic. And they're like, you didn't show up for your scheduled appointment today, because I was like, just petrified. Like, I was like, Amazing. I literally cannot take any more bad news. I just,
so you
can't
weren't
do
testing at home either? Like you didn't do any at-home tests?
Eventually a girlfriend of mine's like, I never go in and let them tell me the result. Like I go do it myself first, which I don't know why I didn't think of that. And I'm like, yeah. And so, but then I bought the test and they sat under the sink and I couldn't do it. And this, by the way, this didn't go on for like months. This just went on past the like
2 weeks
testing that they would, past the 2 weeks, but you're giving yourself shots. So I'm like, am I supposed to still be giving myself these shots that like, make your chances, like whatever it's doing.
Right. Like progesterone or whatever you're on. Yeah.
So I'm like, am I just giving myself these like fake shots I don't need because I'm not pregnant? And I just remember probably the most scared I've ever been in my whole life is when I finally went and like peed on the stick, and it's like whatever it takes, like 2 minutes or whatever, walking around the house. Cause I'm like, I'm going to have a heart attack. Like I just can't, like these last 3 years, it like all boiled down to this. And then I got like a positive line. But again, for me, it was great. It was awesome. But like, not for a second did I celebrate. And not for a second, honestly, did I think that it was still going to work, because all I knew is loss. Like all I knew is being pregnant and it doesn't result in a baby.
Yep.
So I didn't. And I think looking back now, so not only did it work, but it was twins. So they both worked. Wow. And I only, obviously had those 2 eggs. And so to only have 2 embryos and to have them both work is pretty rare and pretty spectacular and awesome. And I'm so fortunate for that. But I never allowed myself to even enjoy. So we told no one. We didn't. I hid my pregnancy on TV.
How long did you hide it?
Almost the whole way. So if you were in the studio with me, you knew I was pregnant at the end. But if on TV, I would put a computer in front of me. I would I would hold my scripts in a funny way. And it was funny because my doctor, who was great, he was like, how long do you think you're going to hide this? And I'm like, the whole way. And my husband was even like, look, I support you. He's like, I don't think he's like, if I thought you could pull it off the whole time, he's like, I would tell you to pull it off. He's like, what do you think you're going to do? But I actually almost did. And there's pictures. If you saw me from the side, you're like, wow, she's really pregnant. But if I had the right outfit on and the camera shooting me straight on, like you did not know.
Oh my God. You know your angles.
I knew my angles.
Right.
But I never allowed myself to have the happiness. And now having 2 healthy kids, I'm like, I wish I had a baby shower. I wish I had.
Well, that's another thing I think so many people can relate to, is you wrote, I vowed not to celebrate anything until they were here. No announcement, no baby shower, not even a nursery until they arrived. And I think that that's really common with pregnancy after loss. It's scary as fuck.
And like, we didn't set up cribs. We had nothing. We literally had nothing. Cause I'm like, you know what? I would rather be in this panic situation of like, holy crap, we have 2 kids and we don't have anything. Let's run out to the store and buy stuff for kids than have to. I mean, I was in that position like the very first time around when I had told a couple people, actually it wasn't the first time. It was probably the second or third time, where like they had bought me gifts and I remember having to like take them back. And I was not going to be the person that like kept them because I knew I'd have a baby someday. Cause I didn't at that point think it. And I remember returning some baby clothes to Nordstrom. And I remember the lady, and it's not her fault, but she's like, was there anything wrong with these? Did these not work out? And I'm like, no, the baby didn't work out. Like, it's what I wanted to say, but I would have never made somebody feel uncomfortable in that way. But like, that's so hard, right? Like, I'm like, no, there's nothing wrong with them. There's something wrong with me. Like,
yes.
And so I just could not, like, I would be like, please don't get me anything. Please don't, like, I wish I had those moments now. Right. But I don't even have like the pictures from being like pregnant. We have nothing.
Yep.
And I wish we did. And I like tell people that too, like if you are so fortunate that you get to be pregnant again, I'm not saying like on day one, like you're shouting it to the world, but like allow yourself a little bit of happiness. And my husband would always be like, you're just stressing about it, but what if it works out? And I personally I could never allow myself to like even fathom that it would work out, because it didn't work out so many times.
Yep. I totally understand. So tell me what happened on January 30th, 2017.
I had, knock on wood, like I had like a very easy pregnancy for not getting far in any of the previous ones. And it's twins, which can be complicated. And then, God, you imagine the lady who circled my 36 years old, it's going to get harder. Well, now I'm like 38 when I was pregnant with twins. So they treat you like you're 58. And I've just had this conversation with a girlfriend recently, this idea of like advanced maternal age. People are having babies older. And by the way, on the flip side of that, people have terrible things happen to them when they're pregnant at 22, like 22-year-olds lose babies. And I feel like overall, like they shame you into being pregnant older. And at this rate, I feel like if you're 38 or 42 and pregnant, you're 38 or 42 and you're pregnant. Like, don't make somebody feel bad about that. Like, when I was pregnant with my, I almost said my husband. No, I was pregnant with my son at 40 and they were like, this is a geriatric pregnancy. Yeah. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, what is that? It's so insulting. By saying that, like, it's not said to make you feel better. And like, you're 40, right? But like, again, you didn't say that to the 22-year-old that lost their baby. And so like, and it hurts them just as much. You know what I mean? Like, I think, like clearly there's risks, but like there's risks in anything. And so I feel like the medical community like really like goes out of their way to like point that out. But anyway, I was 38 pregnant with twins. I'm like a healthy person. Like I didn't gain a ton of weight. Like I didn't get swollen until the very end. And I didn't even get swollen, but at the end, especially with twins, you start testing more. Then I actually wasn't even at the very end. I was at 34 weeks and we went in and for anyone that's lost a baby, you start counting like the markers of like, okay, I made it to 3 months. Now I made it to 4 months. Now I made it to 5 months. And at some point in my mind, I'm like, at what point can I just make it and they're viable? If I make it to 6 months, if they got to pull them, like, can they live? Like, can I get to, so I went in and they were like, are you having headaches? Are you having anything? And I'm like, no, I'm great. And they had the like monitor strapped to my stomach. And I'm like, I'm great. And they're like, have you been feeling like, they start asking questions that were weird, but I didn't feel anything. And it turns out that I had that like preeclampsia. And I guess it comes on so fast that the doctor, so I'm there with like a purse. My husband had we decided to have the babies in Florida. Again, we had been living in Connecticut, but he was a baseball player and spring training was going to be in Florida. I'm originally from Florida. So my parents were in Florida. I had no one in Connecticut family wise. So I'm like, twins go to the NICU a lot. Let's just have them in Florida. I'll have 3 months off. This is where like I'll have help. So I'm at a regular appointment and they were like, why don't we just go next door and have them? And they said it to their credit. For all the medical nightmares I've had, like they were awesome at this hospital. It was Tampa General. They were so good. The doctor was, I just loved her so much. And she only came on very late in my pregnancy when I showed up and said, hey, will you let me have twins here? And she's like, sure. She was like a very young doctor. She had just come back from her own maternity leave. So she gets it. She had a baby and she did everything to like kind of downplay the situation. So the amount of worry I should have had, I didn't have. And like in some ways it's that ignorance is bliss thing. Yeah. She's like, you know what? You made it really far. And like towards the end, you just get greedy because you want to keep them longer, but like, let's just do the right thing and let's just pull them. And I'm like, what? I'm like, and my husband's like, okay, so, like, how these people are prepared with their hospital bags. I had nothing. Like, I'm like, this isn't happening for like another month or two. Like, we're fine here. And, we're just like both, like, I think we just like stared at her and he goes, so when I go home, he's like, when we go home, we should like pack some stuff. And she's like, yeah, you're not going to go home. You're going to go across the street to the hospital and have them. And I think we both just sat there like, that's confusing to us. Cause it sounds like, we're going to be parents today. And like, you would think after all we've been through, we were like very prepared and like we were not prepared. Right. And, again, cause when you've never had kids and you've never had a delivery, like we weren't near the finish line. At least we thought that day. And so then we went across, to the hospital was like next door and they were like, don't worry, we've got all day. Cause I'd eaten breakfast and you can't go into like a C-section or surgery having eaten food. Oh, right. Like, we'll do it. We'll wait till 5. And then they'd come in and they're like, you know what? You don't want to sit around all day. Like we'll do it at like 1. And we're like, okay. And obviously they're looking at like vitals and they're seeing stuff's not good. And then they like come in and they were like, we're going to, let's just like, we'll just wheel you down and do it now. And I'm like, I ate breakfast. Like, is that like, and they're like, that's overrated. All of that's overrated. Like, and it was so quick. And so like everything happened so fast that morning. Like, and both of us were just kind of like these two idiots that we were like, what are we doing? Like, he had to like call my mom because we were staying at my mom's at that point. And he's like, yeah, so she's going to have twins today. And so we hadn't told family members. So literally that day, like my mom was like calling our family, like even my like grandmother and be like, so Sarah had 2 babies today. And they were like, wait, what? What? And I also had this moment. I think I, again, had these moments like that you think are just a given, right? You think that you're probably going to get married. You think you're probably going to have kids. I envisioned like I was going to have this picture in the hospital where it's like the husband and you hold the baby and it didn't happen that way for us, obviously, because it was an emergency situation. So they were taken immediately. I saw them for like a second, like when they pulled them out. And then they were taken to the NICU. And then I had so many problems that I didn't know I was having. And I ended up not seeing them for 3 days because I was like hospitalized on my own for 3 days.
Wow.
So it's also weird to me looking back that like I could have fought so hard to have kids. And then these kids were in the world for 3 days and like I never met them. Like I couldn't get up and go to the like a couple floors down, but I was so out of it and on drugs and they were concerned about strokes and that stuff just happened like very quick, like onset with me, but it all ended up being okay. But like you look back and none of it was the way I thought. And like people that have these pictures from in the delivery room and they have like photographers and they look good. I mean, look, I like rolled out of bed and went to a doctor's appointment. Like there was no makeup. There was no,
I love that you're like, all I had was my purse.
I had a purse with like nothing in it. Like I don't have fuzzy slippers and like a cozy blanket. Like I don't have anything. And you know, I don't have any of the pictures. And then my husband, even now, like, I'm like, you took nothing. He's like, I don't know. I was nervous. Like I didn't know what to do. Like they had to at one point tell him to get his phone out to take a picture. And he did the thing where you think you're taking a picture, but you took the video or you're supposed to vice versa. Like it's all a disaster. And he's like, well, it all worked out. But like, so this idea of being prepared, like we were not. So the whole journey was like a lot and it all worked out okay.
How are the babies now?
Sadly, they're not babies. They just turned 5.
Right.
I tell them that they're babies. And then like my daughter's like, I want a sister. And I'm like, I feel so bad. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen because we can't do that. We just can't anymore. But, and then I actually got pregnant. So after this whole ordeal of life and like, we finally get these babies here, I felt weird being like, I was going to get like an IUD or something, but then I felt weird because I'm like, well, now I'm 40. At this point, I was like 40. And I'm like, the percentage of me getting, I like look at all the percentages of like things. Like I don't have eggs that work. They never worked apparently. Now it's like a 5% chance anyway. Well, sure enough, I got pregnant like pretty soon after the twins were born. They were probably a year when I got pregnant and I was like, oh my God. And I'm like, this is like this. It's weird. It was the only time I actually thought it was going to work out because we were not trying to, and we had gone through basically hell and back. And I'm like, that's what you hear all the time is that people say that like they were told they couldn't have kids and they did all these treatments and nothing worked. And then there's a random miracle. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to work. Like, I can't believe this is so crazy. And then of course, like I lost that one too. And then after that, they were like, you really shouldn't be like, take any chance that you could get pregnant again. So that was the end of it. But I clearly know that I am so fortunate and it is insane to me hearing people's stories to this day that those two even worked. And I try to tell people that as bad as things are, and I realize I can say this from the place I'm in now, as bad as things are, like it's like one call can change your life. Right. And I mean, I was, when I say in bad shape, like bad shape mentally, like not good, like probably should have been in a psychiatrist, bad shape. And things changed. My luck changed. My life changed. It worked out. And I know that that is easy to say when you're in a position that you're past it. And something that I definitely couldn't see when I was in it. And so like, all I say to people is like, I was there, like I was in that bad space and I know what that's like. And it's really hard.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening. And Sara, thank you so much for sharing that story. I really enjoyed talking to you. I'm so glad that you went public with everything that you went through. And I really think you're going to help a lot of people by sharing this story. So guys, if you want to follow Sara, definitely check her out on NFL Network and NFL on Fox. You can also follow her on Instagram at Sara Walsh 10. You can also follow me on Instagram at Infertile Stories. And if you have a moment to rate and review the podcast, it really helps get noticed. So that would be amazing. One more quick thing. If you're looking for community and you're looking for support, check out the Fertility Rally, which is an amazing community, an amazing family that Blair Nelson and I have co-created. We have over 300 members all around the world. It has just become the greatest thing, in my opinion, for people going through infertility. It's support groups, it's Facebook groups, it's just a sisterhood like no other. We have another IRL event coming up this summer and lots of cool partnerships and lots of great things. So check us out at fertilityrally.com and on Instagram at fertilityrally. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you guys next time.